For today's episode, we will talk about visual techniques, shades, and shadows. While lines are essential to the task of delineating contours and shapes, certain visual qualities of surface and volume cannot be fully described by line alone. Even when we vary the weight of a line to imply a shift in the direction of a surface or an overlapping of forms, the effect is subtle. In order to accentuate shape and model the surfaces of forms, we rely on the rendering of tonal values. So dito pumapasok yung tinatawag na rendering. There is your tone versus your texture. So tone is also equal to the value, which is a play of the light in the dark part of the drawing, and you have your texture. This is a tactile quality, meaning you feel it by touching it, but there is also texture through the visual form. So we have the smooth and the rough for the texture. Rendering occurs when you use an eraser to draw. So this is very ironic because when you draw, you use pencil. However, this usually means that the artist applies graphite to the surface and then removes some of it to create lighter values and highlights. It is our process of both addition and subtraction. Tinitimpla mo yung drawing mo through the process of rendering. You use your erasers, you use your fingers to blend the graphite and to create shades, shadows, and line variation. Value. This shading technique all requires a gradual building up or layering of stroke or dot. Shading starts with creating lines and then you build it up. These shading techniques all require gradual building up of or layering of strokes or dots. The visual effect of each technique varies according to the nature of the stroke. So we have 4 variations of shading technique, namely hatching, cross-hatching, scribbling, and stippling. So what are those? In here, you can see how lines create texture and variation. So we have the texture, the spacing, the density, and the direction. The first shading technique is hatching. Hatching consists of a series of more or less parallel lines. As compared to cross-hatching, cross-hatching utilizes 2 or more series of parallel lines to create tonal values. So cross-hatching, meaning magkasalubong yung linya, as compared to that of hatching, which is in one direction only. So uniform yung hatching, while the cross-hatching has 2 directions, intersecting with each other. We have another shading technique, which is scribbling. So scribbling is a shading technique that involves drawing a network of random multi-directional lines. In scribbling, sinabi niya doon multi-directional lines. So hindi lang siya nagva-vary into, or hindi lang siya nakafocus on just one direction. So it's a variation. It's either curls, it's either zigzag, that's your scribbles. And then the last shading technique we have stippling. So stippling is a technique for shading by means of very fine dots. The best results occur when you're using a fine tip ink pen or a smooth drawing surface. So stippling is a drawing technique created by dots. So purong mga tuldok-tuldok lang yung stippling. In this shading technique, patience is a virtue because you really need patience in creating this drawing technique. And mas maganda din gumamit ng pen, yung fine liner pen or your tech pen na nagva-vary din yung points. It's like 0.1, 0.3, 0.5 para may variation yung shade gamit ang stippling. So this is the value scale. Ito yung tinatawag na naka-gradient. We have in here your dark tones to light, and there is also variation in the shading technique with lines intersecting and in different direction. We also have here modeling form, the hard edges versus the soft edges, and a drawing which is composed of line alone and then versus the shaded or application of your shading techniques. So today we will talk about shading techniques or the visual techniques in drawing. So based on our PowerPoint presentation, we have 4. Hatch, cross-hatch, scribbles, and stippling. So paano yung ginagawa? Here we have circles in a special drawing paper. Itong drawing paper na gamit ko is meron ng grid lines. So I'm using Mongol 2 for this one. For hatch, madali lang siya. It's just a series of diagonal lines. So ito, hatch. You just need to control the trajectory of your pencil. Yan. Para mag-create siya ng variation. Didiinan mo lang siya dun sa part na mas dark. So, hatch. Sa cross-hatch naman, those are series of lines na intersecting each other. So, it's either gawa ka muna ng hatch, saka mo to i-cross. Kaya siya tinawag na cross-hatching. So, that's another shading technique. Para mag-create siya ng variation. Para hindi plain or blonde yung shading mo. So it's just a matter of controlling your pencil towards the direction na gusto mo. And then you build it up. Next will be the scribble. So it's a series of curly lines lang siya. Or curly shadings. Para ka lang naglalaro. You build it up sa mga areas na darker. So you control your pencil. Yan. Now we have the stippling. So ang stippling is made of dots. So lahat dots. This will really test your patience kasi you need to focus on it to create thousands of dots para magkaroon ka ng imagery for the shading. Actually, mas maganda ang stippling pag ginamitan mo siya ng pen and ink like this one, a pen liner. Tapos nagba-vary siya ng point. Like for example, gamit ka ng 0.1 and then you develop it or you adjust your shade. So mas magandang stippling pag ginamitan siya ng pen and ink or your Unipin. Pwede rin tech pen. Yan. So, patience is a virtue in this one. Kailangan mo lang mag-create ng maraming dot. Yan. Now, we also have yung ibang klaseng shading. So, I'm using here Staler 2B. Tapos, yung parang graded scale. Yan. So, control your pencil. Yun, and then diinan mo lang siya sa mga parts na medyo dark. Tsaka mo i-lighten pag nandun ka na sa light part. See that one? So, mag-vary lang yung paghawak mo ng pencil sa una. Gamit ulit tayo ng 6B. Oh no. Gamit tayo ng 2B. So ano ba yung smudge na tinatawag? Maglalagay ka dito ng graphite. And then you smudge it using your fingers. To create your shades and shadows.
Now we proceed to our next lesson, which is understanding shades and shadows. Light or visible light commonly refers to electromagnetic radiation that can be detected by the human eye.
The entire electromagnetic spectrum is extremely broad, ranging from low-energy radio waves with wavelengths that are measured in meters to high-energy gamma rays with wavelengths that are less than 1 by 10 to 11 meters. That's the scientific definition of light. In simpler terms, the natural agent that stimulates sight and makes things visible. The study of light is called optics. It's a branch of physics that studies the behavior and properties of light, including interactions with matter and the construction of instruments that use or detect it. In elementary, we already saw this image of the prism in which the trajectory of light, when it enters the prism, it also creates color. So what is shade and shadow? Shade refers to the relatively dark area and those parts of a solid that are tangent to or turned away from a theoretical light source, while the shadow are the relative dark figures cast upon a surface by an opaque body or part of a body intercepting the rays from a theoretical light source. So if you can see the image at the left side of the slide, that's your shade line and that's your shadow line. So the shade is the one at the surface and the shadow is the one that is created by the object. Shade and shadow refers to the technique of determining areas in shade and casting shadows on surfaces by means of projection drawing. To interpret it better, this is a pictorial diagram of how shade and shadow work. Usually we really have a light source, and then that's how shadows behave depending on the time of the day. Shade and shadowing are affected by the sun position and the time of the day. We can also simulate shade and shadow digitally. There is a feature in SketchUp in which you can simulate your shades and shadow based on the time of the day and the month. Now this is the light logic. You have your light source, your light, the shadow, the highlight, the reflected light, and the cast shadow. To understand it better, this is a diagram and a sphere and how shades, shadow, and light affects your drawing. You have the center light, your highlight, your halftones, your core shadow, your reflected light, the cast shadow, and the occlusion shadow. We have another example to illustrate shades and shadowing. This is a drawing of a pear. This is a representation of your highlight and the midtones. So your highlight is the one with the whiter side or the lighter side. And then your midtones, your cast shadow, your reflected light, and your core shadow. We also have your 5 tonal values. We have 3 light and 2 shadow. Ang 2 shadow is the dark one and the dark 2. So mas merong shadow na darker and lighter. And we also have your highlight, the midtone, and the midtone 2. So may variation din siya. May lighter midtone, may darker midtone. This is another variation of your shades and shadow. So always remember that white spaces are safe spaces. You need that in your drawing. It is more realistic if you leave white spaces. To understand it better, apply what you learn in the YouTube tutorials, especially for the girls, because shades and shadowing is also applicable in makeups. Now this is your first exercise. You can just see the transition of the colored photograph into the black and white version of the photograph. So you can see the trajectory of your light source, the texture of the objects, and the wood, and your application of your shades and shadowings. These are sample of realistic sketches available in the internet. They applied shades and shadowing and the proper rendering techniques in here. So if you want to see more of these contents, there are some artists with Facebook pages. Now we move on to your pen and ink rendering. In here, you need to use your Unipin or your technical pen. Here are some examples of your pen and ink. Your pen and ink rendering starts with light sketches on a pencil, and then you use pen and ink to render your subject. There are different types of your fine liners or your pen and ink. You have your Unipin, your Windsor, Staedtler, the Sakura Pigma Micron, your Pentel point liner, the Derwent line marker, and your Stabilo Point 88. In pen and ink, you can also use your ordinary ball pen. So these are some examples of pen and ink rendering available in the internet. This is an example of your ball pen art. And that's the end of our discussion for Chapter 2, Visual Techniques, Shades, and Shadows.